Good morning, Rechavia Nachlaot. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We're able to learn once again in Yerushalayim, 9:30 to 10, Bezrat HaShem, every day, Halavai. We are inching towards the completion of Perek Bet, the end of chapter 2. We're on page Zayin, which in the regular text corresponds to page 12. We've been learning over the past several days about the subject of the neshama and the source of the neshama. That the neshama comes from the atzmut, from the essence of HaShem. And so we are going to continue now after the brackets. It's 7 lines from the top of the page, 2 words before the end. Vav Mem Shin. Vav Mem Shin. And this is the abbreviation is Umasha Katuv. The Alter Rebbe is about to ask a question. The question that he's about to ask is that how could we say that every single neshama comes from the essence of Hashem and is all holy and is all pure, if we see in the Zohar that it's not necessarily so cut clear. The Zohar says that it depends if the father and the mother, the husband and wife, how they prepare themselves before their union, before the inception of the child, and if that's what counts, if that's what's the most important part, so then what do you mean that everyone has this holy neshama? Let's see it inside in the text. Uma shekatuv bezohar. And that it says in the Zohar, Ubezor Chadash, that's also part of the Zohar, Sha'ikr Talui, that the most important thing is, it all depends on, She'yikadesh Atzmo Bish'at Tashmish Tafka, that the parents should sanctify themselves at the time of their union, Masha Einkein, which is not that way, B'nei Amei Haaretz, the children of simple people don't have this concept of making oneself holy. So how can you say that every single neshama is clearly holy and it comes from the highest level of atzmut, seemingly, if the child comes from holy parents that sanctify themselves? Then that child they draw down a special neshama for their child. But if not, then maybe the neshama isn't so holy, doesn't really come directly from such a high source of the atzmut, the essence of Hashem. Hainu mishum, that's because she'ein lach nefesh ruach neshama. There is no such thing as a neshama or a spirit, basically a neshama. She'ein la levush, which does not have a garment, a cloth, min nefesh ta'atzmut aviv v'imo, from the nefesh of the essence of the parents. V'chol ha-mitzvot she'oseh, and every mitzvah that the child does for many happy years ahead, hakol al yidei oto halevush. Everything, it's all through that garment, that levush. Chulu. Va'afilu hashefa shenotnim lo min hashamayim hakol al yidei levush zeh. And even the abundance of bracha that Hashem gives from above, that's through the levush. V'im yikadesh et atzmo, and if the person sanctifies himself, if the parent sanctifies himself before the union, to bring down a special neshama, yamshich levush kadosh l'neshmat beno, then he draws down this holy levush for the neshama of his son. Va'afilu hi neshama gdola, and even if this is a great neshama, tzricha lekiddush aviv, it needs to have the sanctification of his father and his parents, etc. Aval haneshama atzma, however, the neshama itself, hine lefamim it's possible, it happens sometimes, that nishmat adam gavoa le'en ketz, that the neshama of a very, very high individual, ba liyot bno shel adam nivzeh v'shafel. It can come down to be even the son of a simple, a shameful person. I think the literal translation of a shafal is a low life, someone that's really on a low level. They can have a son, which the neshama can be a very, very high level. Soon I'm going to explain, Bezrat Hashem, the general concept. But just to finish first this point, the basic point of the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe divides between 2 points. One point is the neshama itself, and then you have the clothes, the garment. You could take it by a human being, by every single Jew. You have the individual himself, and you have their clothes. What does a cloth do? The cloth, it helps a person fit into a certain scenario. So, initially speaking, a person at home can be revealed in their essence. Essentially doesn't need clothes if they're there themselves. The truth is that a person does need clothes, need to have at least a robe, at least something which covers a person, because HaShem is everywhere, and a person should never be in their home, even in the most private places. A person should never ever be without any clothes. Even when a person is in the washroom, a person should cover themselves, because the Kadosh Baruch Hu is everywhere. We need to be tsanua, we need to be modest. But nevertheless, conceptually, a person in their own domain doesn't need to have any garment. A person is in their own place, doesn't need a garment. Helps a person fit into a certain scenario. So you go in the street, you need to have a garment which covers you. A person goes swimming, there's another kind of garment. In the winter, you go skiing, you need to bundle up, which you can only see the eyes, barely. In every scenario, a person needs to have a garment brings you to a certain scenario. The same thing is true when just 1 second, please. The same thing is true when it comes to a garment of the neshama. The Alter Rebbe says in Perek Dalet, just in 2 chapters. Right now we're in Perek Bet, but in Perek Dalet, in chapter number 4, we have the whole at great length, the whole idea of the garment. What is the garment? Machshava, thought, dibur, speech, and maaseh, action. When a person wants to think, so you have a brain, Baruch Hashem, but how do you think? How do you exercise your thought? How do you process? How do you use your mind that Hashem gave you? Through the kli, through the vessel, a tool, a medium, which is called machshava, dibur, speech. Hashem gave us the bracha of being able to speak. The mouth, the speech, is a koach, is a vessel, through which we can express that which is inside. But before a person speaks, you don't know what I'm thinking inside. When a person speaks, then you know what the person was thinking, and then you can communicate with others. So the mouth and the speech is a vessel, a medium, emtsa'i, to be able to convey a message which is there earlier. And so the Ma says, same thing is with deed. Your hand carries out that which you want to do, or that which someone tells you to do, or that which you're feeling. You want to bring someone a cup of tea as an appreciation, or as a nice act. So your hands help you facilitate this need that you have. Okay, so the same thing is now when it comes to the neshama that parents bring down for their child. You have the neshama itself, the soul, the neshama itself, that, and then you have the tools that Hashem gives, almost like a package deal. When you buy, there's a whole thing in the Rambam, when the Rambam talks about when you purchase something. We learned in the Sefer Kinyan, when you learn 3 chapters a day, So we recently started Mishpatim. But in Kinyan, for example, the Rambam discusses, if you buy a boat, for example, goes through a whole list of stuff. But let's say a boat, something which sticks out because it's a very interesting scenario. So do you also buy the rods? And do you also buy the life vest? You say, you go to a store and you buy, I want to buy a boat. No problem, it costs $1,000. So he buys a boat and he says, what do you mean? I also wanted to have also all the tools, all of the things. What, I'm just going to have a boat without having all the different tools that help me? I can't just have a boat. So the seller will say, what do you mean? You didn't ask me for all that stuff. You just asked me for a boat. So I gave you the boat. The guy says, what do you mean? I can't just have a boat. I meant that I want to have all the things. So the Rambam discusses which parts are most essential for the boat, and that's if there's no other custom in that place. Otherwise, you go see in each individual place what the custom is in that place. So I'm just bringing you an example of where of something which is essential, and then you have the kelim around it. Then you have the tools around the kelim, and usually the vessels, the medium, helps you carry out the purpose of the essence. So in the boat, if you want to actually go in a boat and sail, so you want to know which parts are most essential, which parts are a little less. For example, over here, you go to a store, so they're going to tell you it's going to be a number. In some places in the world, you have when you go to buy something, the label it includes tax, and sometimes it doesn't include tax. Just another example of where it's something taxes in addition to the actual thing itself, but it comes with it. It's a package deal. You know how you say package in Hebrew? Package. And so the whole idea of etzem, essence, versus the extras, so to speak, the tools which you need to carry it out. So now the Alter Rebbe is saying that you have two things. You have the neshama, and you have the levush. You have the levush is almost like preparing the neshama for the great avodat Hashem that it's going to need to do throughout its lifetime for many happy years in this world. So you could have a very, very high neshama, but if you can't tap into it, if you can't relate to it, if you can't bring it home, if you can't use it, so it's almost as if, so what's the point? What did you accomplish? That's obviously not 100% true. It's wonderful to have a great neshama, but it's even more wonderful to have a neshama with its tools, that the neshama with its garments, so to speak, that the neshama should be able to carry out its mission in the world. So the Alter Rebbe explains that when it says in the Zohar that parents, before they have their union to bring a child into the world, and at that point there is a special neshama which is drawn down to the world. So there's the neshama itself, and then there's the garment for the neshama. So he says that the Zohar says that the parents have a koach, have a possibility to bring down, to draw down for this child a special neshama. It's referring to the levushim. It's referring to the garments. Regardless what level the neshama Hashem is going to choose to give to each specific child, when the parents sanctify themselves before their union, they are going to make it easier for the child to be able to carry out his mission in the world. In other words, a person can have an easy time, and sometimes a person can have a very challenging time. You can have a very high neshama with great koach, but if there are challenges in life, then you want to be able to for someone to hold your hand, so to speak. You want for someone to accompany you, someone to help you. And these garments help a person throughout their life. And this idea, this concept of tools, of garments, is something which you can see on many different levels. For example, kosher food, Chalav Yisrael. Baruch Hashem, over here in Israel, it's not such an issue. Because you have Chalav Yisrael, pretty much, to the best of my knowledge, it's a pretty much given that it's a Jewish person that does the actual milking from the cow. But in Chutz La'aretz, it's a big issue. There are some even kosher symbols that are not so particular in Chalav Akum. I'm sorry to say, but over here in Israel, you can buy something with the same wrapper from the same company, which usually could have, I'm not going to say any names, but a very high level of kashrut, and you can the same wrapper but with a different kashrut, and it will say in tiny letters, it will say Chalav Nochri, milked by a goy. And there are some opinions that it's okay to eat it, but in Chassidus it says that if a person eats chalav, milk that was milked by a goy, then it's metamtem alev hamoach. It hardens, it blocks the heart and the mind. In other words, spiritually. I'm just using this as an example, as you could have a great neshama. But if a person eats food which can create a blockage for their mind, and a spiritual blockage for their mind and heart, then they're going to have a difficult time to use this neshama. It's almost like having a beautiful jewel, a beautiful pearl in your pocket, but you can't get to it because it's sewn up. It's sewn. You know, they used to do in the war. They used to sew their jewels into their clothes, so this way the Nazis, Yimach Shemam V'Zichram, wouldn't be able to find them. So it's almost like having something and you can't get to it because there's this mental blockage, so to speak. And so when parents, right before and during their union, they sanctify themselves, they can bring a special koach, a special lavush, a special garment for the neshama of their child, that they should open up their mind and heart for the service of HaShem for many happy years. The neshama itself, getting back to the main point of this entire chapter, the neshama itself, that all comes from atzmut, from the essence of HaShem. And if you want to know the different levels of neshama, Moshe Rabbeinu, our forefathers, or our generation down below, that Hashem decides in every scenario who is called Einei Ha'ida, the eyes of the community, who is called the stomach, who is called the fingers, who is called the toenail. That Hashem decides. But the subject of the Zohar, that's not talking about the neshama itself. That's talking about the garments for the neshama. And that's a different scenario. As the Arizal explained all the final two lines back in the Tanya, the final two lines of this chapter. The holy Arizal explained all of this, elaborated on this in his Sefer Likutei Torah, in the Parshat Vayera, the fourth Parsha of the Torah, Tanya Mitzvot, another Sefer of Kabbalah, Parshat Bereshit, the first Parsha in the Torah. I want to mention a couple of things over here. If we don't have enough time, then we'll continue tomorrow, B'ezrat Hashem. What does it mean to sanctify oneself? To sanctify oneself before and during the union of a husband and wife. You know, in the Zohar, and also in the Sefer Siddur Beit Yaakov, it talks about many, many subjects in Judaism. But the subject of preparing oneself for the night is called Chadar Hamitot. When a person prepares themselves for relationship, marital relationships, in the Zohar, that's called Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies. What? The Holy of Holies? Isn't that something which is very low, the opposite of tzniut, the opposite of modesty? How could the Zohar refer to these laws as being Kodesh HaKadoshim? How could the Zohar refer to this union as being Kodesh HaKadoshim? If we look at other religions, in the Christian religion, the priests officially don't get married because they view marital relationships as being something which is low and unholy. But in fact, in Torah, the Torah looks at it exactly the opposite. If you look at in Shulchan Aruch, the laws of tzniut, and how, the Torah is a guide, kihem chayenu. The Torah teaches us what to do not only while we're in shul, not only while we're in the middle of davening, and how to say blessings, brachot, but the Torah also tells us how to go to sleep. The Torah teaches us how to wake up in the morning. The Torah teaches us how to go to the bathroom and act with tzniut. The Torah is our guide, kihem chayenu. Did you know that in Shulchan Aruch, the number of the Shulchan Aruch is 240 in Yoredeya? Reish Mem. And the explanation is that if a person acts with proper tzniut, then it's Reish Mem. That's Ram. It lifts up a person. But if a person, God forbid, doesn't act with proper tzniut in the privacy of their own home and under their blanket, then it's Mar. You turn around the letters Reish Mem, and it becomes Mem Reish, God forbid. Mem Reish is Mar, is bitter. It's so important to learn these halachot, not only about family purity, Taharat HaMishpacha, but also how to prepare oneself. And there are laws, and it's not a bad idea to scan through these halachot each time before a couple has their marital relations, because it's the Torah. Just like we want to know how to put on tefillin and how to keep Shabbos, we also have to know how to keep the sanctity of the most important component of our lives. The Zohar, the Kabbalah, views this relationship as being Kodesh HaKadoshim, the holiest place in the world, the Holy of Holies, in the Beit HaMikdash, where the Kohen HaGadol, the holiest person, would go on the holiest day of the year. That's where you have the Aron HaKodesh. And that's why in the Aron HaKodesh, in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, when Am Yisrael was acting the way they're supposed to be, then you had, the Kruvim, cherubs, embracing. And when they were not, then they were facing back to back. An image of a boy and a girl embracing in the Kodesh HaKadoshim? Maybe that should be for some dirty magazine, God forbid, or Chas v'Shalom dirty website. In the Kodesh HaKadoshim? That's where you have the Kruvim embracing? Yes. The answer is that's Lahavdil Elef Alfei Avdalot. The same concept of union between husband and wife can be viewed at as the highest place, Ram, and Chas v'Chalila can be considered the lowest if it's not treated properly, if it's not treated with the correct sanctity, with the correct diligence, with the correct super sensitive feeling. So for example, just a couple of examples. We're supposed to wash our hands beforehand. We're supposed to wash our hands afterwards. The kavana, here's the point that I want to bring out about the Tanya. There are, in addition to the technical preparations, and also a certain chapter in Tehillim, chapter 23, and also a certain couple of lines that are supposed to be said. You can see it in the Siddur, in the Chabad Siddur, right before Hamapil, right at the end of the Krishma Shalamita. A couple of lines that are supposed to be said. In addition to that, the Alter Rebbe is referring to another machshava, another preparation. Sheyikadesh et atzmo, that a person should sanctify themselves. That's the machshava. The machshava is the thought. The kavana, that a person wants to bring down a great neshama for their child, to think about a tzaddik, and to think about kedusha, to think about dedication for HaShem. At that moment of the union, that brings down the greatest neshama for a child, for the lavush, the garments. It's a great zchut for a child. And one more point that I want to bring out, that even if a person, if the union between husband and wife is not necessarily for having a child, for example, if it's after childbearing years, or another example, if the wife is pregnant, so there has already been an inception, the child is already being developed. Nevertheless, this is a very important point that I'm going to say now. Nevertheless, every machshava, every time there's a union, even if there's not a physical body which is drawn down, every time, this is extremely important, every time there's a union, there's a neshama which is brought down. In other words, some neshamas, remember we talked about Gilgul neshamot, that neshamas come down sometimes, a few times, in order to complete their mission in the world. Sometimes neshamas come down, as it says in the Kabbalah, as it says in the Zohar, not in a body, but has to come down in a spiritual way into this world. And that's a tikkun for the neshama. Can you imagine what kind of kedusha, what kind of holiness you can bring down for that neshama when you have proper kavanah? And God forbid, if there's not a proper kavanah, and it's not done properly, and it's not done with the right intentions, and it's not done with the right tzniut, that's not good. In other words, the machshava, our thought, is most powerful. It's even more powerful than speech, and even more powerful than deed. Even though we can't necessarily see how it's powerful, because it's very, very refined, it's nonetheless very powerful. So thank you so much for joining us. Bezrat Hashem, tomorrow we're going to learn again. We just finished Perek Bet.